Welcome back to the deep dive. We're going to be talking about Denise Amber Lee today.
Yeah.
You shared the case files with me, and it looks like a really fascinating one.
It really is.
Takes us to Florida in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like it was just a normal day for this young mother of two.
Yeah, just a typical day.
And it turned into a total nightmare.
It really did.
Yeah, so what is it about this case that you think makes it so compelling to people?
Well, I think one of the things that makes this case so interesting is that you see the heinous actions of the perpetrator, but also the potential missed opportunities for rescue.
Right.
So it really serves as a chilling reminder of the importance of having an effective emergency response system in place.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things that I find so interesting about this, too, is that you have this very normal, warm January day in Northport, Florida.
Right.
And then Denise just vanishes seemingly into thin air.
It's true. It's like she just disappeared.
From her home.
Right from her home.
And her husband Nathan was at work.
Yeah, he was at work.
The two young sons were at home playing.
Mm-hmm.
There was no forced entry.
No signs of a struggle.
No obvious signs of a struggle,
Right.
so just a really bizarre situation.
Absolutely. And one of the things that immediately stood out to investigators were the unlatched windows.
Okay.
Because Denise was known to be very security conscious.
Right.
She would never leave her young sons alone.
Yeah.
So that, coupled with the unlatched windows, really suggested that something was terribly wrong.
Right.
And you can hear that panic and confusion in Nathan's 911 call.
Yeah.
It's just heartbreaking.
And then there's this added layer of complexity to the investigation.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
Denise's father, Rick Goff, was a veteran law enforcement officer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that brings a whole new dimension to the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a double-edged sword, I would think.
Yeah.
Because you have the resources and the experience of law enforcement at your disposal, but then there's also that added pressure and scrutiny.
Oh, for sure. It's like walking a tightrope.
Yeah, so as the investigation gets underway, you have roadblocks being set up, helicopters in the air,
Yeah.
multiple agencies involved,
It's a huge operation.
a full-scale search effort to try to find Denise.
Absolutely.
And it's in these initial frantic hours that we get our first really interesting clue.
Okay, what is that?
A teenage neighbor named Jennifer reports seeing a suspicious dark green Camaro.
Okay, a Camaro. What year was it?
It was a 1990s model,
Okay.
and it had this distinctive car bra on the front.
A car bra. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she sees it slowly cruising up and down the street, almost as if the driver was looking for a particular address.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah, and what's really chilling is that this same Camaro was later seen pulling into Denise's driveway.
Wow. So they were definitely in the right area.
Yeah, and Jennifer even provides a description of the driver to police.
Really?
Yeah, she describes him as a heavy-set white male with light eyes and blondish hair.
Okay. So they have a vehicle description and a possible description of the suspect.
Right. And it's strange because at this point, no one connects this Camaro to Denise's disappearance.
Really? So they had this information, but didn't put two and two together.
Right. It's one of those things that's so easy to see in hindsight, but at the time it just doesn't click.
I see.
So the investigation is continuing,
Uh-huh.
and then comes this huge breakthrough.
What happened?
A chilling 911 call comes in, but it's not from someone reporting a sighting.
Oh, no.
It's from Denise herself.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
So she was able to call 911.
She was.
That must have been terrifying.
Yeah, this is one of the most heartbreaking pieces of evidence in the entire case.
Oh, I bet.
You can hear the raw terror in her voice as she pleads to see her family again.
It's just awful to think about.
There's muffled conversation, the sounds of a struggle.
Wow.
It's enough to send chills down your spine just listening to it.
I can only imagine.
And at one point, you can actually hear the man's voice.
Really?
Yeah. He responds to something Denise says, and he says, "I'm 5 streets over from your house."
Chilling. But if they could hear him on the call, couldn't they trace it?
Well, they try to trace the call, but it leads them to a prepaid phone with no GPS.
Oh, wow. So close.
Yeah, and this really highlights the limitations of technology at the time.
Yeah, it's incredible how much technology has changed just in the last, 15 years.
Absolutely.
So they couldn't track her location.
No, but thankfully investigators are able to use that prepaid phone to identify the owner,
Okay.
a 36-year-old unemployed plumber named Michael King.
Michael King. And was he known to the family?
No, a complete stranger to Denise and her family.
Wow. So now they have a name, a face to this case.
Right. And this is where the case takes this really unexpected turn.
Okay, I'm interested. Tell me more.
We're introduced to Harold Moxlow,
Harold Moxlow.
who is Michael King's cousin.
Okay.
And he recalls this very strange encounter with King earlier that day.
Okay.
So King shows up at Harold's house,
Uh-huh.
asking to borrow some tools.
Like what kind of tools?
A shovel, a gas can, a flashlight. And he's claiming that his lawnmower is stuck and he needs these tools to get it out.
Sounds plausible enough.
Yeah, and it seems like a pretty simple request, just helping out a family member.
Yeah.
But then, as Harold is leaving to go back to his house,
Yeah.
he hears a woman scream from inside King's Camaro.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and when he turns to look,
Mhm.
he sees a woman struggling in the back seat.
Okay, that's terrifying.
Right, but King just kind of dismisses it.
What?
Yeah, he says something like, "Don't worry about it," and just drives away.
He just drives away. So what does Harold do?
Well, in this moment of confusion,
Yeah.
he decides to go check out King's story about the stuck lawnmower.
So he doesn't call the police.
No, not right away.
Wow.
But when he gets to King's house,
Yeah.
there's no sign of any stuck lawnmower.
So he was lying.
Right. So Harold realizes that something is definitely wrong.
Yeah.
And he goes back home and tells his daughter Sabrina about the whole incident.
Okay. And what does Sabrina do?
Thankfully, Sabrina doesn't hesitate. She immediately calls 911.
Thank goodness.
So now you have 2 911 calls.
Right.
You have a suspicious green Camaro.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a missing woman.
So the puzzle pieces are starting to come together.
Exactly. And with Sabrina's call, the investigation really kicks into high gear.
So they're zeroing in on Michael King.
Right. They get a search warrant for his house.
Okay.
And what they uncover is chilling.
Like what?
They find duct tape with hair on it. A missing mirror.
A missing mirror. From where?
It seems like it was from his car.
Okay.
And then, most disturbingly, a Winnie the Pooh blanket with what appeared to be stains on it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and these details quickly go from just random to incredibly incriminating.
So they were able to connect them back to Denise.
Right. The hairs on the duct tape are a match to Denise.
Wow.
So that confirms that she was at his house at some point.
Okay. What about the blanket?
The semen stains on the blanket are a DNA match for Michael King.
Oh no.
And while the blood stains on that same blanket were too difficult to analyze at the time,
He couldn't exclude Denise.
right, so it all adds up.
Yeah, it's this horrifying realization.
Yeah.
They have his house, they have his car, which has been identified by multiple witnesses.
Yeah.
But the big question remains, where is Denise?
Exactly. They got all this evidence pointing to King, but they still don't know where Denise is.
Right. And it's in this desperate race against time that another piece of the puzzle falls into place.
What's that?
A woman named Jane Kowalski.
Jane Kowalski.
She has this terrifying encounter with that same green Camaro
Oh, no.
on Highway
Well, we got to
41.
41.
Yeah, she stopped at a traffic light.
Yeah.
And she hears a scream coming from the Camaro next to her.
Oh, my gosh.
And when she looks over,
Uh-huh.
she sees this frantic hand hitting the window from the back seat.
So someone was trying to get her attention.
Exactly. And Jane realizes that something is very wrong.
Right.
And in this incredible moment of quick thinking, she calls 911.
Good.
While she's still on the phone with 911, she starts following the Camaro.
Oh, wow. She was brave. Yeah, she was giving the 911 operator real-time updates on her location,
Okay.
King's movements, everything.
That's amazing.
And King is desperately trying to block his license plate from view.
So he knew he was being followed?
It seems like it, yeah.
So what happens next?
Well, Jane's call was giving investigators this crucial information.
Mm-hmm.
She's describing the Camaro, she's describing the driver.
Yeah.
But then the Camaro just makes this abrupt turn off the highway and disappears from sight.
Oh, no. So they lost him.
Yeah. Jane wasn't able to get a clear look at the license plate before he disappeared.
So frustrating.
I know. But even though they lost sight of the Camaro, Jane's call did give investigators a direction to go in.
Right, they knew which way he was heading.
Exactly. And as this is happening, Harold Moxlow is grappling with his conscience.
Yeah.
He calls 911,
He does.
and he anonymously reports the incident with his cousin Michael King.
Oh, wow. So he finally does the right thing.
Yeah. And when you combine his call with Jane's information, it puts even more pressure on law enforcement. They know with absolute certainty that King is the abductor,
Right.
and they have a general idea of where he might be headed.
So they're closing in on him.
Right. And it all culminates in this dramatic arrest.
Tell me about it.
King is spotted driving the Camaro, and after a brief pursuit, he's apprehended by the police.
Okay, so they got him.
Yes. But when they search the car, Denise is nowhere to be found.
Oh, no. So even though they caught King, they still don't know where Denise is.
Right. And his capture just brings with it this renewed urgency to find her. It becomes this full-blown search and rescue operation.
And they're racing against time.
Exactly.
So what happens next?
Well, they get a tip that leads them to an abandoned construction site.
Okay.
And it's there that the story takes this most tragic turn.
What do you mean?
Investigators discover disturbed soil,
Uh-huh.
traces of blood, and finally the unthinkable. Denise's body.
Oh, my gosh.
She was buried in a shallow grave,
Oh, that's awful.
naked with duct tape in her hair.
So she didn't make it.
No. And this discovery just ends any hope of finding her alive.
Right. It changes everything.
Yeah. And with this horrific truth, the investigation now has to shift its focus from rescue to justice.
Right. They have to build a case against King and ensure he's held accountable for his actions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with the evidence mounting against King, the trial begins.
Okay.
But as we'll explore in part 2 of this deep dive,
Yes.
this case is far from over.
I bet.
There are still twists and turns and this shocking revelation about a system failure that may have contributed to this tragic outcome.
Okay, well, I can't wait to hear more about that.
We'll dive into all of that in the next part.
Sounds good.
As we left off, it seemed like the evidence against Michael King was really stepping up in the abduction and murder of Denise Amber Lee, and I can't even imagine what her family must have been going through during this time.
I know, it's just unimaginable.
The grief, the anger, the just desperate search for answers.
Right, and as the trial gets underway, we really see those raw emotions on full display in the courtroom.
Right.
You know, the prosecution is meticulously laying out their case. They've got the forensic evidence, the eyewitness testimonies, and those chilling 911 calls.
Right. We're talking about the silver ring that was found in King's car,
Yes.
the hair that was found at his house,
Uh-huh.
the DNA evidence that links him to the crime scenes.
It's just this mountain of evidence against him.
Right. It's just a mountain of evidence.
Yeah.
And then you add in those 911 calls, especially the one from Denise.
Right.
I can only imagine the impact that that must have had on the jury.
Oh, I'm sure it was incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
You know, you hear her desperate pleas,
Right.
the sounds of the struggle, that terrifying conversation.
Yeah.
It really paints a vivid and horrifying picture of what happened.
So what about King's defense?
Well,
What was their strategy?
their strategy was to try to shift the blame.
Okay.
They tried to point the finger at a friend of King's named Robert Salvador.
Okay.
They claimed that Salvador was the actual perpetrator
Mm-hmm.
and that King was basically just an unwitting accomplice.
Caught in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Exactly.
But the information that you shared with me indicates that Salvador had a pretty solid alibi for the time of Denise's abduction.
That's right.
He was actually at a gun range with King earlier in the day.
He was.
But he had alibis for the time that Denise was actually taken.
Right.
So did the prosecution buy this?
Not at all.
Okay.
The prosecution quickly dismantled the defense's claims.
How?
They presented evidence of Salvador's alibis. They highlighted the fact that there was absolutely no credible evidence connecting Salvador to the crime scene.
Okay.
And in fact, the judge actually threw out the defense's attempt to implicate Salvador.
Really?
Yeah, he called it baseless.
Wow.
So that didn't work out too well for them.
No, it seems like their strategy really backfired.
It did.
So with their attempt to shift the blame failing,
Uh-huh.
what was the jury's verdict?
Well, after deliberating for just 2 short hours,
2 hours.
just 2 hours,
Wow.
they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts. Kidnapping, sexual battery, and first-degree murder.
So a clear win for the prosecution.
Absolutely.
And while it must have been bittersweet, I imagine it was a moment of relief for Denise's family.
I'm sure it was, to finally have justice served.
Right.
But even with the guilty verdict, the story doesn't end there.
Right. There's still the question of sentencing
Yes.
and this lingering question of whether Denise's death could have been prevented.
That's right. The jury recommended the death penalty for Michael King,
Okay.
a sentence that Denise's family fully supported.
Mhm.
They wanted to guarantee that he would never have the opportunity to hurt anyone else.
Right.
But as you know, while that legal battle was concluding, there was still this sense of unease.
Like something wasn't right.
Exactly. And that leads us to perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire case.
What's that?
The revelation of a system failure
Okay.
that may have cost Denise her life.
So you're talking about the 911 call
Yes.
from Jane Kowalski, the woman who was following the Camaro.
Uh-huh. The woman who was providing those real-time updates on King's location.
Right. So she called 911, she gave them her information, described everything.
She did everything right.
She did.
But somehow that information never got to the officers who were actively searching for Denise.
That's right.
Due to a series of errors, miscommunications, assumptions within the Charlotte County Sheriff's Department.
And this is the same department that Denise's father worked for.
It is.
How could this happen?
I know. It's just unbelievable. Well, it turns out it was a cascade of mistakes.
Okay.
The 911 operator didn't properly log the call into the system.
Okay.
He was relying on handwritten notes and verbal communication.
Oh, wow.
And then the dispatchers, who were probably totally overwhelmed by the events of that night.
Right.
They either assumed that someone else had relayed the information, or they experienced some technical difficulties with their radios.
So either way, this critical information about the green Camaro and King's potential location was just lost.
It was. It just slipped through the cracks.
It's so hard to comprehend a failure of that magnitude.
I know. It's just devastating. And, you know, the investigation later revealed that several deputies were actually stationed along the very road that King was driving on while Denise was still alive in his car.
So if that information had been relayed,
right,
they could have intercepted King.
They could have.
And potentially saved Denise's life.
It's just heartbreaking to think about.
It really is. It leaves you with that haunting what if.
I know.
What if that call had been handled correctly?
Yeah.
What if the system hadn't failed?
Right. It really underscores the fragility of life.
Yeah.
And the absolute necessity of having a reliable emergency response system in place.
Right. And it also highlights the need for accountability.
Exactly.
So was there any accountability for what happened?
Well, the internal investigation that followed resulted in disciplinary actions against the 911 operator and the dispatchers involved.
Okay.
But for many, it just simply wasn't enough.
Yeah.
There was no formal apology from the Sheriff's Department.
So that just amplified, I imagine, the anger and frustration felt by Denise's family and the community.
It really did.
This feeling that there was this lack of accountability.
Yeah.
A sense that valuable lessons hadn't been learned.
Absolutely. But, you know, out of this tragedy emerged a powerful force for change.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Denise's father, Rick Goff, channeled his grief and anger into advocacy.
Okay.
He began pushing for improved training and protocols for 911 operators.
Across the board.
Yes, across the board.
So his efforts eventually led to the passage of the Denise Amber Lee Act in Florida.
They did.
Which at least provides voluntary training for emergency line operators.
Yes, at least it's a step in the right direction.
Right, but voluntary.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not mandatory.
And it only applies in the state of Florida.
Correct.
So there's still a lot of work to be done.
There is. But thankfully, Denise's family continues to advocate for mandatory training and certification for all 911 operators nationwide.
Good.
You know, they believe that Denise's death was preventable, and they are determined to ensure that no other family has to endure a similar loss.
It's just this powerful reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, positive change is possible.
Absolutely.
So we've spent the last 2 parts of this deep dive talking about the tragic case of Denise Amber Lee.
Yeah.
From that frantic search for her to the trial, and then to the shocking revelation of those critical system failures that happened.
Right.
So now I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and look at the Denise Amber Lee Foundation.
Yeah.
You know, this organization that was born out of just profound heartbreak.
Yeah.
It's committed to creating lasting change and preventing these kinds of tragedies from happening again.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I find so inspiring about the foundation is that it's not just about mourning the loss.
Right.
It's about actively working to transform that tragedy into a catalyst for improvement.
Yeah, they've taken this just unimaginable pain and channeled it into this really powerful mission.
Exactly. And that mission has several key components.
Okay, like what?
Well, they advocate for better training for 911 operators.
Okay.
For technological advancements within the emergency response system, and for greater accountability at all levels.
So essentially, they're tackling the very issues that played a role in Denise's case.
Exactly. They're determined to learn from those mistakes and ensure that no other family has to endure a similar tragedy.
Yeah, and they're not just focused on, like, policy and legislation.
Right.
They also work really hard to educate the public.
That's right. That's a crucial part of their work. They want to empower individuals to be prepared in an emergency.
Yeah.
They offer resources on everything from just basic 9/11 procedures to personal safety tips.
So it's about taking this proactive approach to safety
Yeah.
and making sure that people have the knowledge and the tools that they need to protect themselves and their loved ones.
And it's about fostering a sense of community responsibility.
Right.
The foundation really emphasizes that we all have a role to play
Yeah.
in creating a safer environment.
And one of the things that Nathan often says is
Yeah.
if you see something, say something.
Ugh.
He really believes that bystander intervention can be such a powerful tool for preventing these kinds of tragedies.
It's about fostering that culture of vigilance where we all look out for each other.
Right.
And we don't hesitate to act when we see something that seems wrong.
Yeah, and that message seems to be resonating because the Denise Amber Lee Foundation has made some incredible strides
They have?
in raising awareness about these 9/11 system improvements.
Yeah, they've worked with legislators, law enforcement agencies, community organizations to implement training programs, upgrade technology, and develop better emergency response protocols.
And it's just amazing to see how a personal tragedy can fuel such impactful change.
Yeah, and what's really remarkable is that this movement is gaining momentum nationwide.
That's amazing.
Denise's story has touched countless lives, and people across the country are joining the call for a more reliable and accountable 911 system.
It's a real testament to the power of one person's story to inspire that kind of collective action.
It really is.
So beyond the policy changes,
Yeah.
the public awareness campaigns,
Mm-hmm.
there's this other aspect of the Denise Amber Lee Foundation that I find really moving.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're talking about the program that offers support to families who have experienced similar tragedies.
Exactly, because the trauma of losing a loved one in such a horrific way,
Yeah.
it extends far beyond the legal proceedings and the media attention.
Absolutely. And this program is a way to provide emotional support resources and a sense of community to those who are navigating this unimaginable grief.
Right, and it just speaks to the deep empathy at the heart of this foundation. They understand that pain firsthand,
Right.
and they're using that experience to help others heal.
It's really a beautiful example of finding purpose in tragedy, turning that personal loss into an opportunity to offer solace and support to others.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Denise Amber Lee case, I want to leave our listeners with this thought.
Okay.
This story is such a stark reminder of the fragility of life,
It is.
the importance of vigilance, and the power of collective action.
Absolutely.
But it's also a story of hope.
It is.
Hope that by learning from these past mistakes, by advocating for change,
Yeah.
and by supporting organizations like the Denise Amber Lee Foundation, we can create a safer world for ourselves and for future generations.
Absolutely.
Denise's legacy lives on through the tireless work of her family.
It does.
And through countless lives that have been touched by her story. It's a call to action for each of us to be more aware, more prepared, and more engaged in creating a community where these tragedies hopefully become less and less likely.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Yeah.
We hope it's left you with this renewed sense of purpose and a commitment to being part of the solution.